So when you take a woman like Dorothea Lange, for example, the photographer, and you try to examine both her own psychic childhood development and her creativity, photography, and particularly the photographs she took of children and women, the iconic photograph known as Migrant Mother, but also the numerous photographs she took of children looking bereft and alone and lost and abandoned in their rural habitats. How do you connect that to Dorothea Lange's psyche? You know, why not just focus on the objects that she studied?
Well, of course, every individual is unique, and I do not want to suggest that Dorothea Lange was, quote, representative of women. But there's a fascinating combination of things that are very particular to her and things that are much more widespread. To start with one that was very particular to her, Dorothea Lange was a disabled woman. She had been a victim of polio. She ended up with what we would consider today a minor disability, but nevertheless she felt that it was the most important thing that had influenced her in her whole life. In part because her mother was afraid that she would be unmarriageable, that no man would want her because she was, quote, a cripple, which is what the word that people used to say. Well, given that, you can just imagine how she felt when another cripple became president of the United States. She loved Franklin Roosevelt. She loved his policies. I don't want to imply that it's strictly personal, but at the same time, her intense connection about that motivated her. She was quite interesting in that she was a very fine, very experienced photographer, but she had no qualms about taking a job in which what she was supposed to do was to make propaganda for Franklin Roosevelt's agricultural policies.
So are you saying that she gave up her job? She was a portraitist, as I think you've written, and she gave up her portrait studio, well-paid job, to go and work in the Farm Security Administration?
That's right. She was arguably not only an extremely successful photographer who owned her own studio, but she was the photographer for San Francisco's richest, most elite people. She photographed people like the Levi Strauss family. These were her clients. But she also felt a little stifled by only doing this for-pay photographic work. And so she took a job that paid her $2,000 a year approximately, and interestingly enough, although she was the most experienced photographer on the staff of the Farm Security Administration, she received the lowest pay. Even more of concern is that she was the only parent among these photographers, and the work required being on the road for a long time. And the fact that she had to be away from her children so much certainly intensified her feeling for example, the children of migrant farm workers in California and Arizona and Texas who moved from place to place, who followed the crops, as they said, starting with the crops in the southernmost part of the country where they ripened first and moving up to the north. These children, generally speaking, had no access to any kind of health care. Many of them had no access to any kind of education. And from very early ages, they were actually working in the fields, 5- and 6-year-olds.
And what was Dorothea Lange trying to tell us with these photographs?
She was doing two things. She was particularly trying to say that it is very important for the Department of Agriculture to pay attention not only to the rather well-to-do owners of these large farms, but to the farm workers who actually brought us the food. Secondly, at the time she did that work, she was married to a very interesting man who was a professor of economics at the University of California, Berkeley, and he was campaigning for a program of government camps for migrant farm workers. And when some of these camps were established, not nearly enough, you can see from her photography what it meant to these migrant farm workers. They had running water and hot showers. They had a laundry room, not with mechanical washing machines, but at least with big sinks and washboards and places you could hang your laundry. These were incredible luxuries for these people. So she was really willing to focus her art on completely political, you might say, demands, along with other people. The fact is that she also really enjoyed that work. And so there was also a lesson about how meaningful labor, even if it's very low paid and extremely arduous, gave a woman a chance to do a citizenly kind of work, a work in which you feel very deeply that you are doing something to help America.
So in this case, the biography that you wrote had a kind of double meaning. It was about Dorothea Lange as a worker herself, but it was also about the material photographs that she produced, which were and revealed the lives of other workers, much poorer workers than she.
And I think it also, using her as an example, you revealed a lot of things about the state of marriage. She had two husbands, and her first husband was very problematic for her because he relied on her to do everything. For example, no sooner had she married him than he took his 8-year-old child from his previous marriage and simply turned this child over to Dorothea Lange. The child was actually closer to Lange's age than to her husband, because her husband was 20 years older than Lange. So you had this very, very young, early 20s bride who was all of a sudden presented with an 8-year-old who's tremendously resentful about this woman who stole her father away, right? But it's very revealing about the expectation. That is what men who divorced and got custody of children did. They found some other woman to take care of that child. Right. So that was a difficulty. But then you also had this really remarkable transformation in that when she divorced him and married her second husband, Paul Taylor, you would say in modern language that she lucked out, because Paul Taylor was that unusual kind of man who not only respected her, he thought she was a genius. He would do anything to help support her career.
Even take care of children?
Well, no, not go that far. He did not go that far, no. But he traveled with her when he could. He supported her. There's a kind of irony that I always enjoyed, that in the way that feminists of the 1970s told the classic story, a woman gets liberated when she leaves, doesn't rely on a husband anymore and goes out into the work world. Dorothea Lange got liberated when she found a husband who could support her.
Right.
And allow her to do very low paid work.
Right. A wonderful illustration of how the family might work at its best.
Dorothea Lange's job was to illustrate the impact of the Depression on farm workers. And you know, most American farm workers were people of color. She photographed extensively Mexican-American migrant farm workers in the West and sharecroppers in the Southeast. The tragedy of her work is that while approximately 30% of all of her photography was of people of color, none of it was distributed in the Depression. Her boss at the Farm Security Administration said, Americans are not ready for these images of people of color, and since the point was to rev up support for Franklin Roosevelt's policies, we need to use white people in the photographs. So it is only much later, during the Civil Rights Movement, that people discovered that part of her photography.